Back to Kevin in County Galway. Kevin, would you like to ask a question?
Wait 1 minute. I just have to do something.
The Den was a children's TV programme that ran on Ireland's public broadcaster RTÉ from 1986 to 2010. My family didn't pay for anything else, so all we got was like the 3 or 4 public broadcast channels, so I watched a lot of The Den when I was young, because there was literally nothing else. The Den was filmed in a tiny studio with a tiny budget, where a host and some puppets would introduce cartoons like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, He-Man, She-Ra, Brave Star. I'd just like to point out they were airing these when I was watching in the early 2000s, so well past their sell-by date. Well, maybe not Ninja Turtles, that was alright. They would also have guests on, or play quizzes with listeners over the phone, and show off artwork drawn by the audience. The typical kid show fare. But The Den is best remembered for being pretty chaotic, often devolving into the host frantically attempting to restore order and their composure as the puppeteers were shouting over each other.
I don't think I like you. I don't like the way...
Get out of my face.
Oh! Get
Some of the noteworthy puppets include Dustin the Turkey, who was present for the vast majority of the show's lifetime, and became such a cultural phenomenon we sent him off to represent Ireland in the Eurovision Song Contest in 2008. There was also Rog and Podge, who were evil and would fight the show's cast and try to eat the dog. They would later move on to adult programming.
She lured him to the bedroom.
Hope he remembered to empty the chamber pot.
And she pleasured him in 25 ways.
25 ways? Are you sure about this 25?
Then, to finish him off, she slit his gizzard.
She killed him!
Huh?
But while they were...
Huh?
Jesus.
That's kind of like if Sesame Street had a late night show where Elmo smoked crack and threw Oscar into a trash compactor. This brings us to the topic of today's video. Kevin from Galway. Kevin was a mysterious listener who called into the Den in 2004 in a moment that has since gone down in infamy. At this time, the Den was hosted by Francis Boylan, Dustin the Turkey, and Snotzer. There was an ongoing game called What's Snots, where Snotzer would imagine a person, place, thing, or animal, and the listeners who called in had to guess what he was thinking of by asking him questions to narrow it down. If they got it right, they won something like a bike. It was the 1st of April 2004, and there were 2 listeners queued for the game, Amy from Cavan and Kevin from Galway. Years later, Francie Boylan explained that he would talk to the kids over the phone for a bit before the game went live, during which he got the sense that maybe Kevin didn't really understand the premise of the game. Unfortunately, they only had so much time before they were live, and so...
Amy, you came up first to ask Snotzer a question.
Is this a person?
No, it's not a person, Amy! Back to Kevin in County Galway. Kevin?
Yeah?
Would you like to ask a question? That's not...
Where'd you get your shades?
Where'd you get me shades?
So, it is instantly obvious that Kevin has no clue how this game is played. Actually, I'm not even sure if he realises he's even playing a game. His opening question, "Where'd you get your shades?" has since gone on to become a minorly popular referential joke in Ireland, where the clip of the segment went viral, largely due to Boylan's struggles to maintain his composure and progress the game along.
Kevin, you can ask your question, Kevin.
Kevin, you can ask it. It can be a person, place, thing, or object. What would you like? And it can be yes or no.
What? Say that again?
It can be a person, place, thing, or object, and you can ask him a question. If you'd like to ask him.
To try and guess which one I am.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, would you like to ask me another question?
Yeah.
Where'd you get your hairstyle?
Boylan's eyes could be seen darting around throughout the segment, and he later said that this was because he suspected that Kevin was an actor and that the crew were playing a little April Fool's prank on him. He keeps looking at members of the crew to figure out what's going on.
We'll have to go back to Amy. Back to Amy Shields in Calvin. Hello, Amy.
It's an object.
Yes, it is an object. Yes, indeed. Would you like to ask another question?
Does it cut anything?
Does it what, Amy?
Does it cut it?
Of course, no, it wouldn't cut
No,
anything.
it wouldn't cut anything, Amy, but good question all the same.
A good question. Back to Kevin in County Galway. Kevin, would you like to ask a question?
Wait 1 minute. I just have to do something.
Whatever this new take your time, it's only live national television, so don't worry about it.
At this point, Dustin the turkey is missing from the frame, having left to ask the producer if this is a joke. It isn't. Kevin is a real caller, and I have to try to continue the game with him, even if Kevin apparently has better things to be doing.
What do you think of another question for me?
Kevin, have you not...
Hello?
Kevin, I'll tell you what. We go back to Amy.
Go back to Amy. Amy in County Cabinet. Hello, Amy.
Hello. Could you write on it?
Could you write on it? No, you couldn't write on it.
Kevin in County Galway.
I can't really hear you on the phone.
Sorry.
Despite his laughter, Boylan bravely attempts to re-explain the game to Kevin halfway through the segment.
Kevin, we're playing What's Not.
Yeah, it's a quiz we do every Thursday.
And it can be a person, place, animal or object. And Kevin, would you like to ask a question to Snotzer? Like, are you a cow or something?
Are you a sheep?
Right, not a bad question. No, I am not a sheep. I don't speak things up and just say that I am a thing. Right, I'm a thing.
Right, be doing this ball back to Amy.
Shields, yeah.
Wait.
I'll give you a hint, Amy, right?
What?
It's something that you could have a stairs. It mightn't, because some of them do and some of them don't.
Sorry, could you say that again?
It could have a stairs. Some of these do and some of them don't.
Francie Boylan has since gone on to say he was only in the job for about 7 months at this point and was a little worried about how things were getting out of hand. Maybe his job as kids' TV presenter could be in jeopardy if he demonstrates he can't keep control of it. He attempts to rectify the matter before losing control again a mere second later.
I apologise.
Do you go upstairs?
You could go upstairs in this thing, Amy, and if you'd like to ask me another question to be more than welcome.
Yes, but that's a yes, so another question, Amy.
At this point, assumedly in a bid not to be outdone by Kevin, Amy, who has so far seemingly understood the game, begins to shit the bed.
Could you go up to the ceiling?
Yes, it would have a
ceiling. You're dead right there, Amy,
Is it the ladder that you go up to the ceiling with?
No, it's not. No.
It's back to Kevin and Galway.
Right, it rhymes with mouse.
Back to Kevin and Galway. Back to Kevin and Galway.
It's an object.
Yeah.
Car?
No. It's back over to Amy in Kevin.
There's a saying, right, that you could be as safe as...
Safe as? You could be safe as...
As safe as...
Ha.
Rhymes with mouses.
As safe as a hatter.
As safe as a hatter.
It sounds like even Snotzer is starting to laugh now. Well, these two idiot kids aren't going to figure this out, so let's just end the segment and get out of here.
I tell you what, I think we're wondering...
Well, what we'll do is both of you win a bike.
So they both win the bikes, despite not actually winning the game. They were so bad that the show basically had to forfeit them in a way that wouldn't upset their feelings, I guess. Especially after this fella just laughed at them the whole time. But there's a twist to the story. We now know who Kevin from Galway was. 13 years later, in 2017, Francie Boylan found Kevin, now 24, and invited him on his radio show to discuss the now infamous clip.
What's the story? Kevin.
Good, yeah.
fuck, you're tall. What's the story? How are you keeping?
He was small with a hair loss since.
I was small with a hair loss. Take a seat, take a seat, take a seat. What's the story?
Not a bit, no.
Where'd you get your shades?
The man himself. He seems like a nice fella, actually.
Can we go back to one of the first things? Because I remember talking to you off air, right?
Yeah.
And I remember talking to you, because we used to always have to talk to yourself and whoever kids were on. And I remember kind of turning to Dustin and Snotzer and going, I don't know if Kevin gets this. Right?
So why didn't Kevin get it? What was going on? Well, bizarrely, Kevin explains he had actually been watching the game for weeks before calling in, and that the issues he experienced on air were due to a faltering telephone. He was struggling to hear Boylan and was apparently simultaneously searching for a better phone, which explains why he asks the presenter to momentarily pause the game while he does something else. Although, you know, that still doesn't really explain his questions, or how he didn't seem to know how the game was played. He admitted it himself. He was watching the game for weeks.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it happened right on the 1st of April 2004, right?
Yeah.
And we genuinely in studio, and that's why my eyes keep diverting left and right in it, because I'm like, is somebody taking the mick out of us? Yeah. And Dustin, right? And Dustin leaves the shop, right?
Yeah.
Because he goes out to our producer Hilary at the time and says, like, it's the 1st of April, are you taking the mick out of us? Is this an actor, right? And she was like, no. And did you mind me laughing? Because I did, you know, I tried, right? I wasn't long in the job, you know. I was only about 7 or 8 months in the job.
Okay.
And I was laughing at these kids live on television, and I did try to redeem myself. You might remember this, and I said, I apologise. So, I apologise, And wait. I'm laughing, right? And I'm going, and I apologise, and I apologise, and I apologise. And I remember the sweat happening to me, right? I'm not joking. I remember when it was all over, and I remember the sweat happening, I was going, did that just happen? I mean, was Kevin for real? And that's why we thought it was a joke. And
I got off the phone thinking the same thing.
So did Kevin get his bike in the end?
Yeah, of course I got the bike.
Was it a good bike?
Or
can you remember much about it?
It was a pretty average bike, to be honest. At the time, you had the back suspension and front suspension. This one had just the front.
All right.
It was an okay bike, like. It's not one you go and buy, like. But yeah, I had it for the 3 days, and I was pulling the wheelies all around the place, and I sold it then.
You sold it?
Yeah, I did, yeah. After it was wrecked.
Yeah, after you'd done everything with it,
So that was 3 days of pulling wheelies, basically, and I sold it then for €250.
You thrifty, who are you?
Yeah.
Ungrateful bastards. He does also explain it apparently took like 7 months to actually receive the bike. Francie Boylan talks about how giving away both bikes to get out of the segment was actually a problem.
You know, the funny thing is, when that day was finished, I went into my producer, Hilary, right? And she went, no, two bikes! Like the budget of RTÉ was blowing.
To end the interview, the two take a trip down memory lane and play another game of What's Snots for old time's sake.
And Kevin, you get to ask Francie a question. Kevin? Would you like to ask a question?
Hold on a minute.
I
meant to ask you something now, is it?
Yeah, you can ask me a question. Ask me a question as if you're playing What's Snots. Yeah. All right, is person, place, thing, animal or object?
Alright.
I'm going to be honest, I still think he doesn't fucking get it.
I'm still confused 13 years later.
We should, so you can basically play What's Not.
Yeah.
Or so go on, ask me a question.
Okay. Does it have wheels?
It does have wheels.
It does have wheels?
It does have wheels, yeah.
Okay, is it a car?
It's not a car. No, it's not a car.
Is it a trailer?
It's not a trailer, no.
Not a trailer. Jeez, wheels.
Think of it. Think. Wheels. What keep going? Not a car, not a trailer.
Not a car, not a trailer. It's obviously not a lorry or anything with an engine.
No.
Nothing with an engine. Go-kart.
No.
Timber one.
No. No. Think. What's nuts?
It's a bike, Kevin. It's a fucking bike. Come on.
What did you get?
A bicycle.
Hey! You both.
So 13 years later, Kevin from Galway hasn't changed much. He's apparently still living in Galway too. On his way out, they give him a nice parting gift.
It's only something small, right?
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to see it? And so this will just make sure everybody knows that you're Kevin from Galway. We gotcha.
Where'd you get your shades?
Where'd you get your shades?
Yeah.
Right? And on the back of it,
I'm
Kevin from Galway. Come here, from myself and Michelle and everybody at Ocean FM. That's for you.
Also, looking at Francie Boylan's Twitter, it looks like the pair went out and got pissed after the show. Well, isn't that a nice little story? I hope Kevin is doing well. I wouldn't enlist him for a quiz team or anything, but I'm sure he's a decent fella. And that's about all I have to say about Kevin from Galway. So please join me next time I decide to look into what is ultimately an asinine story. And until then, can I get an amen? Can I get a hell yeah? Can I get a subscribe and a follow on Twitter? Yeah, that's the stuff. Alright, I'll see ya.
I'm taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the sonic roof up. I'm too honest when I take a few shots. They're too toxic, need to take a new song.